It's Digging Deeper time. Another week, another sermon to dig into.
I'm hearing the music in my head right now.
Yeah?
Like that. I don't
It
know.
does not go like that. It doesn't go like that at all.
It's kind of like circus feel.
Yeah,
Sorry.
All right. So what are we doing today, Pete?
Today we are digging deeper.
I know that. What do you want to dig into?
There's all kinds of things to dig deeper today.
Okay.
Here's where I want to start. Outside of the message itself, which was great, really enjoyed it, and a lot of good stuff. A few weeks ago, you came to our team who puts together a lot of the elements for Sunday services and things, and we had a list or a plan laid out that you had created of what you want to talk about. And on there, you had a series, you had some very specific ideas. We had a title for the series, graphics, everything like that.
Looked good too.
Yeah, it was cool.
It was really cool.
And then it was obvious that maybe you were kind of wrestling with it a bit. And eventually you're like, I'm not doing that. And you just started doing these one-offs. Talk us through, for people that don't see that side of our church or whatever, your process of 9 months ago having a different series, but in the moment feeling like this just isn't something was going on inside of you that said, this isn't what I want to do. What does that look like for you and as your process for creating sermons?
Yeah, I think everybody's wired differently. So what I'm going to probably say and answer is not across the board or whoever's preaching, like whether it be Rice City or in general, but like I personally have a very difficult time preaching something if I'm not really experiencing it or feeling it in the moment. So to plan out 9 months in advance, it's really hard for me. I'll do it because I think it's really a good thing for our production team and graphics and videos and try to have at least some forward thinking. But when I get closer to the actual time of whatever's pre-planned, there are times where I'm just like, I'm not sure this is what the church is going through. I'm not sure this is what I'm going through or what I feel like what we need to talk about. Or like the series we were going to do was one of the first times I was ever going to repeat in a different way a series that I'd done at Rice City Church. The series was going to be looking at the temptation of Jesus. I'd done a series, the very first year we started church, so 9 years ago. So I felt like, after 9 years, I can come back around and repackage this. I personally just have a very hard time preaching the same message twice.
Yeah.
And so as I was studying it and wrestling with it, I was like, I'm just not there. And so I said, I've got to, for me, be true to like how I lean in and feel like there's just something intuitively that comes upon me and says, okay, I'm going to try something different and feel like this is the direction instead. And where I have a hard time in doing so is because I feel like then I can then completely derail all the efforts of like the rest of the team who's been planning or maybe making videos or all that stuff. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And so, but now we outsource a lot of that stuff. So I don't feel bad.
Yeah.
So whatever.
Yeah. And the question wasn't based on feeling bad about people that were doing things. It was more just like your process. I would say, not as a pastor of the church or even an employee of the church, but as someone just sitting in the audience, I will say the last few weeks have felt different. And I use the word felt because I can't.
Yeah. There
is something personal that seems to be coming out of you lately. Like the last few weeks, it just felt, again, I keep using that word because it's not like, well, this content or this content, but there's a distinct difference between what feels like a packaged series, not bad, but like our money series that we did in August was prepackaged. That's the wrong word. It wasn't prepackaged, but it was put together. It was organized.
It's 4 weeks. Here's the different topics. It's all pre-planned.
It was stuff that you felt was important for us to know as a church, but it didn't feel like it was coming from Brandon. And I feel like the last few weeks, every week, it really feels like you're kind of almost a little bit more raw up there, maybe?
That's probably true. Yeah.
Like, I wonder, like, is there a general thing right now or a theme or something that is bringing these things together in your personal life that's motivating what you've been talking about the last few weeks in general?
Yeah, I would say the theme is it starts with me finding months of really wrestling with the legitimacy of what I do and the God that I follow. not legitimacy of like, does God exist? But just like, I've seen a lot of people walk away from church. I've seen a lot of my friends' churches close their doors. I've seen my own personal like walk at times stagnate just because I'm tired. I'm tired because of whether it's things I'm personally trying to work through just as a father of 4 and, husband and working through just that dynamic as a family. I'm tired because I feel like most of the people I interact with are tired. And so a lot of people are in crisis mode. And so there's a lot of triage that happens. And I have a chance to look back over the last year and a half. And probably the thing that's been the most difficult is looking at, is what I've done as a pastor bearing fruit because of what transpired in the pandemic. And in many ways, either people that left or people in the way that they responded at times with a lot of divisiveness and vitriol and nastiness.
Yeah.
There's things like that make me ask, oh my goodness, like I kind of pour my life into this and when there was a moment that like you need to see that people would respond hopefully in a Christ-like manner, there was discouragement because it didn't always happen that way. And so I think that as I've wrestled with that, I've tried to also start evaluating like, well, I can't just point my fingers at other people. Like what's led me to have that disillusionment at times and say, God, where are you? Why is it so hard at times to experience you right now? As our church has gotten, in a more stable place, both resource-wise with money and staff, like, did we take the foot off the gas and get lazy? Sometimes when you have plenty, like your dependence wanes. And so I've just been asking, like, is that a part of it? And just in the ways I've preached or what we've done as a church, like have those things, right? You reap what you sow. So what we saw be reaped at times in the pandemic, I didn't like it. And so it's like, so maybe we got to sow differently. And a part of that is saying like, I feel like we have lost. And when I say we, I mean like not just Rise City. I mean like we as Christians we've never had to really deal with a lot of adversity as a body of believers in this country.
Yeah.
At least in my lifetime. We've always been in the majority and things have been easier. And I think it gave us a lot of freedom to extend the kind of lopsided side of grace at the expense of truth. And yeah, everybody's great and we're good. And hey, let's just talk about your personal development. Let's talk about your spiritual journey. And at times not equipping the body fully with grace and truth, as we talked about, to be able to endure things when they get difficult, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's just not being the majority in the country anymore and some of the laws and even in California. So I don't know. So all that said, I have spent a lot of time wrestling with God on that. And I sometimes probably, I don't know how not to do this, project what I go through onto everybody else. But as an intuitive, but as an intuitive person, I feel like that, and in the conversations that I have and things that I glean and pick up, like I just sense that a lot of people right now are they're tired. They're wondering why they can't get their mojo back spiritually. They're trying to figure out where is God. And they're also like feeling like I don't know if I was ready to jump into something like this. And I feel like that's where it's like, okay, the scriptures speak a lot about this. And I don't know if I have personally led us in that way for a while. And so we need to talk about it. And I would say the last thing, long answer, I've just come to realize the power of the screen and people's attention and how that is so formative in disciple making in people's lives. And if I don't, and if we don't as Christians begin to ramp up some of the ways in which we try to create opportunities to disciple people that somehow is more powerful than whatever news station they're constantly watching or whatever social media medium they're looking at or whatever YouTube videos that they're constantly just perusing. Like people have been lulled to sleep and put in echo chambers. And it's like that idea in our mission of wake up to Jesus. Like I think there's a wake up moment that needs to come. It's coming back within me. And it's like, I look at my kids and I'm just like, man, we've got to wake up, because we've entertained ourselves to death, and we're so distracted, and our attention is on so many other different things. And where your attention goes, generally your allegiance goes. And so I feel like I felt like God has called me personally back to saying, wait a minute, come on. Like you've leveraged one side of the grace side at the expense of truth, and you haven't also equipped yourself well to endure through hardships and suffering. And so I have to get better in that. And it's probably led into the preaching element. So, So anyway, it's definitely tied. But that's where I've been. So
I think that the reason why I even posed the question is because it comes out. I was thinking, and I know the thing about digging deeper, you preached yesterday, we're recording this on a Monday. But really the last 3 or 4 weeks have kind of had this same feel. And you talked about suffering and vegetables and that thing, and the comparison and some of these things. And I was thinking, even as you were talking, these two metaphors that we have in the scriptures that, I don't know, like I was thinking about Paul talking about what is often interpreted as like an end times, when you get to heaven thing, that, God's going to burn everything, and whatever isn't gold gets burned and whatever is gold remains. And we often use a verse like that, I think, in this context of, well, one day when I get to heaven, I'm almost like, I think Paul wants you to let the refiner's fire come through quite a lot and ask, has the way that we've been doing church, once fire hit, shown that we've been mining gold, or just dross that burned up and went away? And like, we mentioned before we started this podcast that someone that I sometimes listen to is Carey Nieuwhof, who does a lot of like, why are churches struggling? And he's out for help leaders and things, and everyone's freaking out. And it's like, I think it's safe to say that the church in America has been building on sand a lot. Yeah. And when a tsunami hit, a lot of things crumbled. But it's interesting to see then the way that impacts preaching.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I would say that the other thing is, like, I noticed within myself, like, I've been doing this for 20 something years. So I know how to hit autopilot really easy if I wanted to. And sometimes prepackaged series, and by prepackaged, it's not like, if you're doing it or I'm doing it, it's not that like we're using somebody else's content and here we go. But it's just like, I've got it all figured out. It's all planned. And generally I can even create things that maybe I've preached on before and do some different twist to it. I felt like God is calling me right now to deeper levels of dependence. And part of that is week to week trying to spend intentional time pressing into what do you want to say, God? What do you want to say to me? And then the overflow of that to others. And I think that like the last month has been a lot of like Monday, Tuesday, I'm just, okay, Lord, what do you have? Like, what do you want to say? And I'm hearing him, and
that's cool.
And I think that probably comes out a little bit because it's also not near as polished, because I'm not getting my notes to Jean until like Thursday or Friday, when I was supposed to give them to him on Tuesday or Wednesday. But
I think when you talked about, you mentioned, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what are we offering people versus the screens and things? I think it's legitimate to ask the question of, in the rise of podcasting, which we're doing right now, I have been intrigued to think, and I, appreciate your shout out, whatever, but like podcasts are intriguing to me because I remember having conversations just 3 or 4 years ago about how people's attention spans are short. They want it quick and they want it polished and they want it clean. And now it's like people are listening to 3-hour podcasts that are just people rambling. It's almost like there is something about wanting something real and raw and genuine that comes out when you just put a mic in front of somebody versus when you have everything perfectly arranged and you get on the stage and you present it as a lecture, which is hard for me because, and we've like, even the way that we approach preaching in our preparation, I am very, very detailed. I write it out word for word. Yeah. And I have stress over how I want to phrase things. And since I kind of started doing some podcasting, there's this really uncomfortable thing that hits me when I sit down and turn on the mic. I don't have that in front of me. And I feel like, but then also I think there there are times that people are just like, we like the fact that you don't, because it just feels like we're getting real. We're getting what's on your heart. Even this conversation, like nothing that we've just said.
Yeah.
I had one question. It wasn't any of this. I think there's something cool to that. I also think though, and I'm not as a counterbalance, but just almost like what you're describing can get exhausting.
Sure.
If every week I got to hear from God.
No. I totally agree with that. Like I'm already right now thinking in January, February, like where are we going as a church? And so like I'm trying to think through particular themes, books of the Bible, stuff like that. So I think it's a different season. Yeah, it's season. And it can also be very terrifying to come to a blank screen on Thursday and be like, the Lord has not said a darn thing yet. So I don't know what we're doing. And even, I mean, it's not like I'm winging it. Like,
right.
As I'm listening, like what do I want to talk about? I'm still studying. I'm still trying to like craft certain phrases and try to figure out this stuff. So it's a balance. But it's just not premeditated in the sense of months in advance saying, at this particular time, I want to talk about this. I am really just intrigued right now with our culture, where it's going. I have a fascination with politics.
Yeah.
And I think some of that stuff, like I can't help, but I look through those lenses as I look through the scripture too, and say, okay, I think these are things that I just want to be able to talk about, the things that I think people are watching or talking about all the time throughout the week. But I want to do it with a biblical worldview. And because I think that's the discipling piece that's missing. People are all watching the same stuff, but they're not listening or looking at it through a biblical worldview. And so how do you interpret all these things happening as a follower of Christ through the way God wants us to see it and with scriptures talk about it versus just whatever the news channel is or some random dude doing a blog or a podcast?
Just because some of my ideas come from other things I listen to.
Yeah.
One I listened to when I went to Disneyland this week and had a long drive.
Sweet. That sounds like hell.
It actually wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. No. But a person that I don't know personally really, but who I really admire is a guy named Glenn Packiam. And
oh yeah, you used to work with him, right?
Yeah. He was at the church I was at. He wouldn't know who I am, but
yeah.
He was on Newhoff and he wrote a book about resilient leadership recently. And he was talking about the podcast and he was using Saul as sort of his template, looking at Saul's failures. And he gave like 3 different things. It was really good. I thought about getting the book. But
you don't need to now because you already talked all about it.
That's the problem with podcasts.
Yeah.
One of his points was, and this wasn't planned. It's not my note. I just hearing you talk, this popped in my head. He talked about how, like, the question was oftentimes, why do leaders end up struggling and flaming out? And his biggest issue was, he said, in his opinion, one of the most difficult challenges that people like yourself face is lead pastors of churches keep getting things stacked on top of their jobs that like nothing gets taken off. So first you're the preacher, but then you're also the counselor, then you're the budget manager, then you're the philosopher, then you're the politician. And no human being possesses all of those competencies, much less the time or ability to become competent in all those things. And he made this comment about Saul that I'd never heard before, how when Saul, there was the disobedience piece about keeping some of the leftovers after a war, but Saul actually was offering them as sacrifices, and Samuel came and condemned him for it. And Glenn made this statement, along with just the basic disobedience, it was also Saul was the king and it wasn't Saul's job to offer sacrifices. And Saul was actually stepping outside of his role and trying to do things that he was never called to do. And in the moment, what they were actually talking about specifically was the realm of politics and how Glenn made the comment of like, the church wants us to address these things.
Yeah.
And then the church gets mad when we have an opinion, and we also get in trouble when we're not fully qualified to give an opinion.
Yeah.
So you demand it and you're upset if I don't give it, but if it's not what you want or it's not fully informed, I'm not a full-time politician.
Right.
And it's, I personally have much more of a, I don't know, just this like, oh my gosh, I'm staying out of that kind of mentality. Not necessarily just because of fear, but also I guess it just makes me anxious. But for you to look at things like politics, social issues, which you're interested in, and I'm not trying to push the tie too much, but one of your points was the way that even John the Baptist was willing to speak to a king in power. I don't know. Where is the line in your mind between I have opinions, I know what the Bible says, but I'm also not, I don't agree in poli-sci or something.
What's interesting is this morning when Jamie and I were praying together and talking or whatever, she referenced that point in the sermon when I made a parallel to, Joe Biden, Antipas, and some of the things. And she said, I feel like you did it in a gracious way because I'm not trying to advocate.
I do too.
But what she said, she goes, but I can't help also to think about Saul and how David said, I'm not going to strike down the Lord's anointed. And looking at like a Romans 13, which talks about to, respect and honor those that are in position of authority, such as our commander in chief. So like, was there any part of what I did yesterday in calling out what I see as a pretty blatant hypocrisy, calling out the Lord's anointed? Because did God put him in power? And so I think that it's one of those things for me that it's a fine line to try to balance, to say, I want to have something that speaks into what everyone's watching and see what the biblical worldview is. But I also, I'm not here to cut down, in this example, the president of the United States and who he is and where he's at in life, and to judge his Catholic beliefs and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to stay at this level, but to see it. But the moment you even mention a political figure or a political party, people's political hats are immediately on. That's how they hear it.
Right.
And so like even this coming Sunday, like I'm scared to death.
I think we all are.
Because it's like, I know it's the midterm elections next week. And I, this is me personally. I am not a fan of churches that tell people how to vote. I think in those situations, oftentimes you alienate to one party at the expense of people of the other party actually still might love Jesus. And so what I want to look at though is a social vision of the church that oftentimes I think is hijacked politically, but is actually very biblically based. And I want to look at that and help that inform as we go to the voting ballots, like not who to vote for, but like these are issues that matter to the heart of God. And they're also things that the church historically have always saw to be important aspects that align with God's heart. But I know it doesn't matter how well I try to craft this thing this week. It's going to cause some to love and some to hate, some to point fingers on. And I'm like, why are you doing this, Brandon? Like, why are you doing this? Like, you're just intentionally causing division. And it's like, no, I'm not trying to cause division. I'm trying to help people see from a broader perspective. And until we get out of the echo chambers, until we get to the 10,000 foot view, until we try to see the like people involved in those different political parties or move out of politics in different economic spheres, right? Like sometimes I find this fascinating. This is a total tangent, but like, I mean, the Bible was written by the losers.
Absolutely.
Right. And the poor and all this stuff. But yet usually it's the people right now in the first world countries that have access to print and digital, and we read it through the lens of the winners. It's like, no, this was written by this. Like, I just want to keep trying to expose ourselves to seeing this from various vantage points, because we can get really myopic and just see it from our own. And so to me, it's worth taking those chances. And I feel like God is, like, I would say that, like, it's kind of emblazoned me to say, let's do this in a loving and honorable way. But to your point, as far as like wearing multiple hats, I never want to ever. I don't ask for sympathy in this for me or for those that are part of the occupation of being a pastor. But I do find it to be a very unique profession. There's very few, if any, professions that I know of that you are supposed to be and considered to be an expert in all of these realms of, I'm a child psychologist, I'm a counselor, I'm a theologian, I'm a political whatever, financial. And it's like, I'm not an expert in any of those things. Some of those I'm better than others, but it's an expectation. And so I have to be willing to say, okay, where do I feel like I have, and I think you're really good at this, Pete, like, where do you have the greatest level of expertise? Like, I will always look to you in theology, history, any of those types of things, because that is really where you are so well equipped. From for me to speak about, even like just past week on your podcast, talking about like First Enoch and Jude and all this stuff, like I preached a sermon on Jude and I didn't know half what you said. and it's fine. But I'm saying, like, I think we've got to lean into, like, I want to surround myself with people who are better experts in it. I lean into Mariah a lot with child psychology and parenting stuff, because that's really what she spends a lot of her time looking at. I hope that people lean into me when it comes to trying to bring people to the middle and having a balance of grace and truth and being marked by love. But I think that, like, if we are not willing, or if I feel like the call God's given me, if I'm not willing to engage in some of these circles, then I'm also just relinquishing the flock that God's entrusted me to pastor to just like maybe be devoured by wolves. And I take that really seriously to say, then I don't want to really personally have to stand before God and say, yeah, you know what? It was just too hard.
Yeah.
So,
and to add, I guess, some context too, like I was very specific when I said the hats that you wear. And I'm not saying that just to, like, you know, butter you up or something. I mean, in the sense that any organization, a church like ours is in some ways, in many ways, built like a business.
Yeah.
In the sense that you have staff members who have expertise hired to do expertise things. Mm-hmm. You have someone with expertise in children's ministry running children's ministry. You have someone with expertise in cameras doing cameras. And for me, it's like, okay, I have some abilities in administration, management, and whatever. And theology, things like that. You are the person that everyone is like, yeah, but you need to know all of it because you're in charge. Like, if you're over it, you need to know about it. Like, you manage all these different things, so you need expertise in them. And then you also need, you know, to be able to help me counsel my 12-year-old who's, you know, like, what?
Yeah.
And so it is something that I think I feel like I can sit in a position of comfort at times and be sort of glad that I don't have to, but then also ask myself, how can the rest of us continue to support you, but also try to find ways to help other people realize that it's not realistic to put all those things on you. And it leads to the senses of burnout and like, I don't want to do this anymore. No, so,
but sometimes I think just even the matter of like exposing things like this, like, it's helpful. Like, we have a fantastic team that I really love, and there's so many different gifts and talents and people of expertise that we lean on. You know, one of the things I think I did hear in a Carrie Nieuwhof podcast a long time ago, a guy named Andy Crouch was just talking about the role. And it seems like Glenn Packian picked up on the same thing. But like, right, there was a time when the pastor was the one who was the primary shepherd that would be there to do funerals, hospital visits, just a lot of that type of, you know, rub shoulders and love on type ministry.
And for 80 people.
Yeah, and for a small amount of people. And then as churches started to grow, you know, there was also levels of excellence that happened in the services. And so to reach a certain level of excellence, and so for my message or for the worship team to have this level of excellence, then there's a decent amount of time that needs devoted to that, which means a decent amount of time is getting taken away from that other ministry of hospital visits and counseling, stuff like that. But what's happened is people still have the same level of expectation of excellence for the Sunday morning.
Right.
And they also still believe that you should be available to do all this. So it's just like, well, if you want me to do this, then you gotta be okay. This isn't like as excellent as you think. And the hard part in our culture is that people, loyalty's thin, man. And like, so it's like, oh, it's not good. Like, we had a moment yesterday in the service, right? Where I think we had one of our things not work. And so like, I think you caught it, right? In the worship, like we have that little
auto tuner,
and it leveled up our vocalist to be out of key. It wasn't her fault, but it was obvious.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, and you're like in that moment, like what's so sad is like some people like, if that's there are people that like, they hear that and like, oh man, their worship team's okay, but man, they really messed that one up. And you're like,
we're going somewhere else.
And so you're like, come on. Yeah. Like I think as a pastor, like, I think it's probably more meaningful for me to be at hospitals and for me to love on people and to be there and encourage and equip them, because especially with the amount of information today, like, okay, the sermon's great. Hopefully they're fantastic, but you're not going to remember much of them. Or if you're like my kids, all you're going to remember is like, remember that time you talked about when our dog ate rocks? It's like, awesome. So I don't know, we're kind of off point, but I just think that like the more that we expose those things, it's not to feel sorry for me or the lead pastors or anything like that. It's just the body of Christ is supposed to not rest on the shoulders of certain people, but for all of us. And the more that all of us step into these types of realms and become active ambassadors as the church, I think the church, large C, not just Rise City, becomes more effective. And maybe we don't have such a level of expectations of excellence and performance moments, like preaching, worship, and we see what matters most in like actual life moments with people.
There's something else that it leads into, which is actually the main thing I had notes for it. I know it's all right, whatever. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of roundabout, and we're going to come back to right where you just landed.
Okay.
Mariah went on maternity leave for 2 months.
Yeah.
And while she was gone, Steph, our early childhood pastor, stepped in and just ran it.
Yeah.
And there were a few occasions where you made comments that were comments about applauding Steph's ability to do all this amazing stuff. And it was like, wow, barely didn't even notice Mariah was gone. And when
I'm so interested where this is going.
When Mariah got back, she made
like
a joke about
backed
it.
Into a corner
she made
now.
a joke about it. No, she made a joke about it. But I also was like, I know you're joking, but let me just respond. Where she was like, man, I guess I don't even need to be here, kind of thing. And she was laughing about it. But I said to her, and I learned this, I think it was John Maxwell, one of his laws of leadership. And I'm misquoting him, but it was something to the effect of the best leaders are actually the ones that make themselves unneeded. And I said, Mariah, like, if you ever start thinking that or if you think that your bosses are disappointed because you've made yourself unnecessary, you've completely misunderstood what your bosses are actually hoping you accomplish.
Yeah.
Because when you have someone that is under you, who you see them actually training up other people to do their job, you want to promote them. You want to give them more. And if you work under somebody who has that, if you work under like a Mariah, who's just fantastic at that,
Yeah.
you love it. It's like the best job. That's the best manager you could have. Someone that wants to empower you and lift you up and let you do their things. But even though you know it, and if you are a manager who knows that you want people under you to do that, or you are an employee who wants your manager to do that, if you are the person, you're convinced you're the one person it's going to backfire on and you're screwing yourself. And you can't give it away. You can't make yourself not important. You can't make him more and myself less, because then I won't be needed and I won't have a job and they won't want to pay me anymore. And it's such an interesting thing, because anytime you look at it from the outside, you see it and you say, well, of course, the best managers are the ones that train people to do. But when you're the manager, when you're in it, you're just like, I can't let go. I can't. And when you talked about that with John the Baptist, of just like this idea of like, he had followers, he had a movement, he had people around him, things were happening. And then Jesus shows up and they all start going over there. And he's like, yep, go,
Yeah.
you know? And Jesus looks at him and says, you're one of the greatest, which is so in line with so much of his teaching when he said to be great is to lose your life and to let it go and to serve others. Where in management, and here you are in a position of leading this large organization, you see people who are good at empowering and training and raising up others, even if it means they might be redundant. And you're like, no, that's not bad. I'll just promote you and give it. But and then you do it. And I'm just wondering, like, what is that like for you as the lead pastor, and just a human being, like in that place of John the Baptist, of sometimes if I give too much away, well, what do I do here? And what if they're better than me? And what if they replace me? And all those kind of thoughts that we have as humans.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I may be a different person to ask that question than someone who's in mid-level management.
Yeah. You're at the top.
Yeah. So like, I don't have a lot of fears about, like, at this point being replaced. But I do have a lot of concerns about, am I doing all that I can do to earn my paycheck? And so to delegate certain things, to take certain things off my plate, well, then that means I have less maybe responsibility. And, I feel like I need to lead by example, but to work as hard, if not harder than everybody else, and set the pace and all that kind of stuff. So that's where I struggle of delegation. But I think that one thing that I've always been convinced and convicted by was just, I remember when I went to visit the 7 churches of Revelation in Turkey, and it was a seminary trip. And I remember standing at what was the location of Laodicea, which is the church that he condemns for being lukewarm. But I just had this moment where I was like, we just visited the remains of these different churches. And they're like in the Bible. Like Jesus wrote them letters through John, but they're done. Like it's done. There's ruins. And I just had this moment where I was like, whatever I lead someday is going to be ruins. And so to build something up just about based upon my efforts or what I do, it's going to be rubble anyway. Like, and so then why don't I pay attention to what Jesus says? And when he says to empower and to equip the saints do the work of the ministry and to do things not solo but as a team, like I just found myself wanting to like really do that. So when we started Rise City, I mean that was my trajectory from the beginning. It was like, how do I have a potentially even go a co-lead pastor, which we went that direction for a little bit. Or I don't want to be the primary voice that everyone looks to, even if I think I'm the best preacher. Or even if I think that people gravitate towards what I preach, whatever. It's like, no, it's healthier in the long run for people to hear various voices because they're not relying on one person. So if Rise City goes into ruins quickly, because I leave, it's not going to happen as much because they have different voices and they can continue to grow. So I just feel like shared leadership is so much better. And it's a bigger perspective. Probably came from looking at that thing in Turkey. But I think the thing for me personally, and maybe just close with this, where I find that I can't delegate, and what God has called me to is creating the culture of Rise City Church. Like that to me, and that's a intangible but yet tangible role. There's parts that comes with preaching. There's parts that come with how I interact with people in the lobby and how that comes with responding to emails and time. Like those are things that I cannot, as the lead, outsource or delegate away. The culture of Rise City Church. I want to impart it so others carry it out and create it. But as long as I am vigilant in trying to say, what does it look like for us to be a loving, life-giving church who brings hope and healing in Jesus' name, and that environment both be what we say, but what people feel and experience, I think that's my primary job as the pastor of this church.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
Yeah.
And I just was thinking like, that going back to the previous conversation about maybe we stack so many things on the leader, we do that, but then we also have to admit that sometimes the leader, and I'm saying this generically, sometimes the leader takes all that stuff on,
sure,
and not recognizing that, well, they actually have other, because they feel like if I don't do it, I need to be, I'm like, well, actually you have experts all around you, but it is true that the one thing you can't delegate is the vision and culture of our church, where you go with it, where you set it. And I would say that people who call Rise City home, who aren't just sort of passing through, I think a lot of people feel that and know that, and it's why they call it home. And it's why a lot of us love working here. So I appreciate you doing that. I think you do a great job at it. I've enjoyed the last few weeks. I'm a little bit nervous about Sunday. I think I might be coming down with COVID this weekend.
Gosh, COVID comes back. Our whole staff's gone because Brandon's going political. Man.
But you're right. Sometimes you are the shepherd and you have to protect sheep.
Yeah.
So I'll be praying for you.
Thanks.
And I won't be there. Anyway, all right. That was
cool. You're fired. That was going so well, and then all of a sudden we both started to. But we gotta go trick or treating tonight.
It's Halloween.
It's Halloween. So by the time you listen to this, it's over, and someone's got a birthday. Is that tomorrow?
Tomorrow,
November 1st, because you share a birthday with my sister.
Yeah.
So how old are you gonna be?
44.
44. So shout outs to Pastor Pete. Happy birthday, number 44. Any big plans?
Just gonna sit in my room and eat candy.
Awesome. By yourself? That sounds like your best birthday. That's great.
Just wrappers all over the place.
So Pete will be at least 5 pounds heavier by next week's podcast of Digging Deeper. So thanks for joining us. We're gonna call this one a wrap. And
all right. See you guys. Have a good week.
See ya.